Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a second submission by Joan of the horse Legend. And he's done a lot of improvement since the last time we saw Legend. In the first video we saw, everything was coming along really nicely, but it was kind of inconsistent. The stretch was there sometimes, some not so. But now the horse is really staying there really consistently, and that's what we're looking for. Great job. I'd like to mention that Joan is also one of our associate trainers. She was just out here working with us in California for a week, a month or two back. And she's taken all that information home. She's outside of Cleveland and is also the one who hosts our clinic there, which I think we're there again sometime in the spring. I have to check my schedule to see. But she's the one that you'd want to contact if you're interested in that. And also if you're looking for somebody to work with back there, I'd highly recommend this very dedicated young lady who's doing a great job and has at least understood the most basic parts of this, and the horse must stretch and get over its back. That's our foundation work, and if you can do that, ultimately you can do everything else. So this is really good, because walk could be a little bit more active here, but as I said, compared to the first video, it's much more consistent. Horse is much more swinging over its back and just staying very nicely in the stretch, not popping up as it was in the first video. Once again, we'd like to see the walk just a little bit more active, but you're getting that as you go there, like that. Good. Now this horse is not developed enough to show much thrust. That is, he's not pushing much off the ground. Of course, they don't push much off the ground in the walk anyway, but when we get to the trot work. And you'll see that this horse is pretty hollow behind. If you look behind the saddle, there's got a pretty good dip, but that's improving all the time. And compared to the first video that we saw of this horse, this is a big improvement. And definitely everything is moving in the right direction. That's very nice as she moved into the trot. You know, he pretty much stayed right there, much better than he did in the last video. Now, once again, as we talk about that thrust idea, now he's working over his back quite nicely and much more consistently in the first one, but he hasn't developed much thrust yet. That he's not pushing off the ground with the hind legs yet. But I'm sure if she continues to do this, he will. They all do in time, given the opportunity. So this is really good. Could be just a little bit more active. I'd send him on just a little bit more here, but not a whole lot. It's really very good. And you can see that he still stumbles around a little bit here and there. And that's, you know, it's very normal for horses to be on their forehand. We can't pull a horse off their forehand when they begin. So the only way we can get a horse really off its forehand is for it to develop off the forehand. That is, for the withers to come up in time and develop enough top line that the horse can begin to thrust off the ground with its hind legs and lift the rider into the air a little bit. So that's not happening yet with this horse, but it will soon, or within a reasonable length of time, if everything keeps going the way it is. So once again, it's not, you know, it should be the normal thing we see for a horse to be a little on the forehand at the lower levels, for instance, in dressage. You know, I see people go to dressage shows sometimes, and you know, at training level and intro level, and the judges putting on the score on the forehand. Well, I would expect a horse at that level to be on the forehand. You know, they've got to be on the forehand before they develop, and then as they develop, the back gets strong enough, the hind legs begin to push the horse off the ground, and we have some decent thrust, and the horse is no longer on the forehand. But horses never get off the forehand by doing things like reining them back endlessly, and so many of the things that a lot of people do with horses, thinking that they're getting them off the forehand, when really what they're doing is just getting them excited and shortening their gaits, which makes them feel, to the uninitiated, like something is happening that's real. But in fact, it isn't. As soon as you open up the horse again, you find that just everything falls apart once again. So this is the way we get there, just slow, consistent work like this, getting the horse over the back. Once again, remember that it takes, you know, from the point of a horse like this, it takes about 2 years, 1 year to fully develop the top line and to bring it to the point where the horse is really beginning to get off the forehand, and about another year to bring it to the point where everything has developed enough that we can begin to develop collection. And once again, correct collection can only be developed with a horse that has been developed correctly. You know, no amount of pulling the horse's neck back into the body will make a horse collect. In fact, that's just the opposite effect. The more we pull the body back into the neck, the less the horse will ever be able to truly collect. Remember that collection means the lowering of the 3 joints of the hind legs and the degree to which the horse maintains that lowering. That's what we're looking for. Collection is not, as I hear so many people say, oh, it's something about getting the horse underneath itself and engage. Well, engage is not the whole thing. It has to lower the 3 hind legs. But usually when people try to describe collection for me, what they're usually describing is a working trot, which means the horse must be working over its back and engaged from behind underneath its body and beginning to thrust from that position, the horse then lowers the 3 joints of the hind legs and maintains that lowering. Once again, for a good example of that, watch Charlotte Dujardin. That horse maintains collection throughout the test. That's why it's scoring so high in dressage these days. But this is really good and it's going to develop into something really nicely. It's a good leg yield. She's keeping the shoulders slightly in advance. That's good. And you can see how he kind of pulls up a little bit, but she softens him and he comes right back down into it, and that's just what we're looking for. So this is just about the right pace for this horse. Remember, forward doesn't mean to run a horse off its legs going straight forward, A lot of people are confused by the concept of forward. Forward means to engage forward under the body, not to run forward. So a lot of people I see are running their horses so fast that they're kind of running them off their feet. In other words, so fast that they really can't stay engaged. It's active, but it's not engaged enough because it's going too fast, and they kind of run them onto their forehand. Remember, a horse weighs a lot. Let's say 1,000 to 1,200 pounds, some much heavier than that. Point being is it's like a freight train. There's a lot of inertia there. So the faster you go, the more that very weight is driving the horse onto the forehand. So with every horse, we're looking for that optimal speed where we get them as deep as we can and moving as actively can, but not so much that we send them onto the forehand even more than they already are to begin with, That way they develop. Once again, coming back to a good walk, I like that downwards transition that she did a moment ago. And once again, we can see that this horse still walks, with a little bit of a hesitancy in the hind leg, so to speak. But that's coming better all the time. If you compare this with the first video that she did, this is much, much, much better. And once again, as we see in another few months' time, you'll see that back beginning to develop and the hole fill up behind the saddle. So any horse that you see that that's hollow behind the saddle like that and is supposed to be collected, well, there's no way they can be because the back is so misformed, so to speak, to allow that to happen. So we've got to get this work first, then we can get collection. This is a good swinging walk, and I like how she brings him back and just does some walk work. That's perfectly well and the correct way to go about it. Let him stretch out again, keeping the horse relaxed throughout all the work. That's so important. I can't stress enough how important it is to stretch out your horse. So, somebody was just asking me last week, oh, should I get after my horse? My trainer keeps wanting me to get after him, make him go faster, faster, faster. Well, and the horse doesn't want to move. Well, usually horses that don't want to move, there's some reason for it, even if that reason is just that they're so out of shape that they really can't handle it. But it is the nature of horses that are healthy to want to move. Now, of course, when you're talking about some of the more heavy horses that some people try to use for dressage horses, I see people using these half draft horses and things like that. Well, these are horses that are made to work at a walk. I mean, a draft horse is basically made to pull a plow around a field or a wagon or something. It's not meant to trot. So you really have to take your time with those horses and just don't beat them up trying to make them go forward. Everything I'm seeing here is very good and a huge improvement over the last video that we saw, including Joan's position. You notice her leg is back further underneath her body. Her upper body is really nice and straight. Really good. And that was a good transition back into the trot again. Once again, she didn't try to hold his head down. She just activated him and softened him a little bit once he got started. So for this horse, I think this is about the optimal speed trot-wise right here. And once again, it'll be great to see this horse over a numerous videos so that we can see him develop. Once again, it's the point of why I'm doing what I'm doing here is that most people have never seen horses developed over time. They see horses however they are, and they think that's just kind of the way they are. They come that way. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. You can take a horse that looks like nothing and turn it into $1 million looking horse if are willing to spend the time. And you can also take $1 million horse and completely destroy them and have them looking like a nag and in 6 months' time, if you let them hollow their backs and drag their hind legs along behind, and they begin to sink through the center, the bad-fitting saddle, for instance, that cuts off the circulation, doesn't allow the horse to lift its back. So all of these things matter a great deal. So when you have horses that don't want to move, you really need to investigate why they don't want to move. In most cases, it's because they simply can't or are in pain from something. They might be perfectly sound, and you have a saddle on them that's cutting their rib cage in half, or squeezing them at the withers so hard that they can't, or blocking their shoulders from swinging back. So all these things have to be looked into. The way the horse is shod can make a huge difference. You know, in this day and age, it's very epidemic, this what we call natural balance shoeing, they're calling, where they're chopping off the front of the horse's feet. We used to call that a bad shoe job, where they square off all the toes on all four legs. And what that does, if you have a horse that's hollow, it makes them lift their legs up really upwards rather than let the leg swing from the shoulder, which is what we want. So horses that are hollow trip less when they shoe them in that manner. But, you know, also if we shoe them in that manner, then they'll never move correctly. So best way to go about it is simply get them, shoe them correctly for correct movement, and then develop them so that they can. So this is really good and shows a big improvement over the last video that we saw of this horse. Joan is a very talented rider who's just doing really well with this work. She's going to have a great career. So any of you that are in the Cleveland area, I highly suggest that you look her up. If you're looking for someone to help you work, she'd be a good candidate. Love how she comes back to that nice walk. And look how much better the walk is. Each time we come back to the walk, there's less of that sensation of the horse pulling its hind legs up out of the mud, so to speak. That's about right. There we go, like that. You can see when he just dropped down a little bit lower, you can see his back came up and he got a little rounder action in the hocks. What we're looking for. That's a good leg yield right there. Very nice for this horse at this development. But once again, we can still see that this horse hasn't developed much thrust off the ground yet. But if she keeps riding him like this, he will in time. Really good, nice consistent contact. Lovely ride. So in the next video, Joan, I'd like to see you do some shoulder ins now, starting on the long sides. You got your leg yields doing well. Remember, you can also leg yield from the long side. So the sort of hierarchy of the movements would be leg yielding from the center to the outside, then leg yielding from the outside to the inside, and then starting some little shoulder forward. Not a full shoulder in, just displacing the shoulders to the inside a little bit. Once again, that's a good leg yield. He could have crossed over just a little bit more in that, perhaps. But he kept the rhythm nicely, and that's, remember, more important than anything else. A horse that constantly loses his rhythm is not going to develop anything. So that's the thing we must always be aware of, is the horse maintaining that nice rhythm. And look how he comes back to this walk. Each time she's come back to the walk, there's a little more swing in it, a little deeper step, a little more deliberate step from the hind legs, which is what we're looking for, instead of the hind legs looking like there's something that's just being sort of drug along behind the body. Nicely back into the trot again. Now here he just looks a little slow. I feel like you could send him on a little bit here, which is what you do right here, so that's good. You felt that yourself and you corrected it. Good work into that. And we can still see how this horse just struggles just a little bit. He needs to be a little bit lower in the front. You can see there when you brought him up to this height of the head and neck, all of a sudden he looks like he's a little stumbly there and having a little more difficulty. So that tells me, once again, we want to let him back down again, which is what you're doing, which I love. So as soon as you feel whatever you do in terms of the position, if it has a bad effect on the gaits themselves, well, it has no value whatsoever. So this whole idea of like getting horses' head and necks in positions, you know, really doesn't mean anything at all if the back end isn't coordinated along with it. So that was a really great ride. Super improvement over the last time we saw this horse. Keep up the good work. Once again, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride with our good friend Joan here in the Horse Legend. We'll see you next time. Great work, Joan.